You know, Mr. and Mrs. America, and I'm part of Mr. America, I'm so sick of the media lies and the Democrat Party lies, and some of these outlier Republicans join in. Remember the Epstein files? Okay, they're released. Anything on Trump? Not a damn thing. Remember the Russia hoax? Okay, went through that for 2.5 years. Nothing, zero, zero, zero. Remember Trump's taxes? Some guy leaked them, then they released them. Oh, there's a lot of stuff there. Absolutely nothing there. And we chase these lies and we go down these rabbit holes time and time again. And so now I've got to do it again. I want to deal with Venezuela. Venezuela. Now we're going to do this in a very smart way, so get ready. First of all, we have the Washington Post on November 28th, a Friday before last Friday. So September 2nd, we hit this narco drug Venezuelan boat. And in the amount of resources the media are trying to use to try and prove that these people are just innocent Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, just having a ride, just having boxes full of oranges and lemons. They're trying to have a good time, and we, the bad United States, are blowing them out of the water, and we're looking for survivors so we can kill them too. And the media and the Democrats running, this must be war crimes. And they go to their favorite former federal prosecutors, their favorite so-called military experts. Is this not a war crime? Of course it's a war crime. That's right. Now we got to take off Pete Hegseth's head, and we got to go after the admiral, and we got to go after Trump. We need hearings. We need to know what's going on. And we find out they're being briefed after the fact, because we know they can't be trusted with secrets. They'd be leaking them. And that's not unusual. That's what presidents do. They say, oh, by the way, in Grenada, we're invading them right now. That's what Reagan told the members of Congress. They don't tell them in advance, and they don't have to tell them in advance. Here we have the Washington Post, November 28th, almost 2 months after that first boat is hit on September 2nd, digging, trying their very best. What do they have, 712 reporters on this? I don't know. Headline, as 2 men clung to a stricken burning ship targeted by SEAL Team 6, the Joint Special Operations Commander followed the Defense Secretary's order to leave no survivors. Flat out lie. It never happened. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth gave a spoken directive, according to 2 people with direct knowledge of the operation. Quote, the order was to kill everybody, one of them said. Never, ever happened. But for a week, it's discussed as if it's a fact. Let's go on. The Special Operations Commander overseeing the September 2nd attack, the opening salvo in the Trump administration's war on suspected drug traffickers in the Western Hemisphere, ordered a second strike to comply with Hegseth's instructions. 2 people familiar with the matter said. The 2 men were blown apart in the water. Hegseth never issued the order. He had walked away, as he later said. It never happened. And those 2 men were blown out of the water, but not because they were targeting 2 men based on some fictional order, but because apparently they were trying to say what drugs hadn't been taken out and calling for other druggies and narco-terrorists to come help them and get the material. Hegseth's order, which has not been previously reported because it never happened, adds another dimension to the campaign against suspected drug traffickers. Some current and former U.S. officials and law of war experts have said that the Pentagon's lethal campaign, which has killed more than 80 people to date, is unlawful and may expose those most directly involved in future prosecution. So they go to these clowns who don't want to give their names. They're experts. Can't they give their names? And they're giving legal and constitutional information. They don't even have all the facts. They don't even have the correct facts. Now, here's one who's on the record. The alleged traffickers pose no imminent threat of attack against the United States and are not, as the Trump administration has tried to argue, in an armed conflict with the United States. These officials and experts say because there's no legitimate war between the 2 sides. Killing of any of the men in the boats amounts to murder, said Todd Huntley, a former military lawyer who advised Special Operation Forces for 7 years at the height of the U.S. counterterrorism campaign. No offense, maybe that's part of the problem, just saying. Even if the U.S. were at war with the traffickers in order to kill all the boat's occupants if they were no longer able to fight, so here again, he's giving advice on information that's false, would in essence be an order to show no quarter, which would be a war crime, said Huntley, now director of the National Security Law Program at Georgetown Law. This report is based on interviews with and accounts from 7 people with knowledge the September 2 strike and the overall operation. All a bunch of liars. Now, Huntley's not lying. He's just giving advice on bad facts. And I would argue his advice is wrong, too. Now, what do I know? I know the Constitution of the United States. And that's the basic law of the United States, okay? Article 1, let's start there. Congress has the power to declare war. Declare war, not make war, declare war. The War Powers Act of 1973 was passed when President Nixon expanded the war in Vietnam, which was not a declared war, into Laos and Cambodia. Congress had the votes to do it. He vetoed it. They overrode his veto. Now, what does that say? You got to consult Congress within 48 hours of each attack, and also military options are limited to 60 or 90 days unless Congress authorizes it. Now, does anybody know what's wrong with the War Powers Act of 1973? Raise your hand. I do. You can't amend the Constitution of the United States on basic core principles like separation of powers with a statute in 1973, and that one Congress has the power over all future military activities. The Supreme Court's never ruled on the core issue of whether this law is constitutional. It's unconstitutional. If you want to change the relationship, the power structure between Congress and the president when it comes to war, then try to amend the Constitution. They're never going to do that. Why? Because they can't. There's not enough votes to do it. But Mark, you say only Congress can declare war. A president, well, he can't take military action against another country without congressional approval. That is Congress's what? Authorization, a declaration of war. Declaration of war is not authorization. That's not what the Constitution says. Nor is there any support for this interpretation in our country's history, starting with the first war overseas, the Barbary Pirates War, the first Barbary Pirates War that we've discussed in 1801 to 1805 under Thomas Jefferson. There was no declaration of war. Let me give you a hypothetical. Let's say Congress, in an odd situation, we declare war. We declare war on Canada. President says, well, good for you. I'm in charge of the military. That's not happening. Is that unconstitutional? Nothing in the Constitution prohibits the president from taking military action. Congress has the power of the purse, which can use to cut off funding for that action, which it eventually did in Vietnam. That's the power it has. The president is obligated to protect our nation. Congress funds the military. Congress has the power to declare war in extraordinary circumstances. It's done it in only 5 cases in our entire republic's history. 5, and yet we've had hundreds of military operations, combat operations, even extended military engagements. Harry Truman, the Korean War, undeclared. The Vietnam War, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, undeclared. Reagan, Grenada, undeclared. Bush 41, Panama, undeclared. Bush 43, Afghanistan, undeclared. Bush 43 again, Iraq, undeclared. Obama ordered over 500 drone strikes in Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Libya from 2009 to 2016. Deaths of perhaps in the thousands. He had a statutory authorization, he claimed, which he really didn't have. No declaration of war. None. Congress declared war in the war in 1812, the Mexican-American War, 1846, the Spanish-American War, 1895, World War I, 1917, of course, World War II, 1941 and 42. The Constitution, Article 1, you can declare war at Congress. Article 2, the president runs foreign policy, the so-called commander-in-chief provision. Now, I just want to be clear. There's a difference between the word declare and make. It's an interesting thing. You know, the framers of our Constitution, at first, they used the word make in Article 1. That Congress had the power to make war. Then they had a debate. They said that would be a disaster. All these people fighting with each other over whether to make war. The president has the power to make war. He's in charge of foreign policy, national security. He'll be the commander-in-chief. You need one person. Congress has the power to declare war. Now, does that have any legal significance? Not really. It is a statement to the world that we, Congress, support a war effort against whatever or whomever. To make war is up to the president. That's the way it is, despite all these former federal prosecutors, all these so-called professors. That's your history. That's what they said. Now, Venezuela has been attacking our country with killer drugs for years. It's a government attacking our country, not an individual, not a specific drug cartel, a government attacking our country through its actions, killing up to 100,000 people a year, but some percentage of 100,000 people a year who are using drugs and overdosing, probably much more than that, because that 100,000 figure is a figure of overdoses. A lot of people are dying from drugs like fentanyl by taking one and by taking it accidentally. So that figure is low, but they are a main actor in this regard, a main actor. They have deployed to our country untold numbers of members of the Tren de Aragua gang. But it's not a gang. It's an international militia. That's what it is. Drug trafficking, sex trafficking, criminal and so forth. It's like a kinetic part of their military, if you will. So it's more than a gang. It's an international arm of the state, of the government of Venezuela. We're not talking about like gangs in our cities and that. No. This is a big operation backed by the state and so forth and so on. This militia works with other international cartels backed by other enemy countries of ours. It has been officially designated by our State Department as a foreign terrorist organization in February 2025. They are under the direct control of Maduro, the Venezuelan government. Our president's actions are against the government of Venezuela, and those actions are strictly defensive. Defensive. He's trying to protect you and me. He's trying to protect our families and our children from an enemy government that is pushing drugs into our country, that is taking that money to hold up the government, to buy arms, to give support to terrorist groups like Hezbollah. They're tied in like this with other countries like Iran, with Cuba, with Russia, and with China. I'm not even going to have time to get into all the intelligence activities and military sharing that's going on with them and so forth. But that is all going on, and they are killing and maiming American citizens. So let's be very clear about this. Number one, Congress is being informed of what the administration policy is, of administration actions after the fact in order to maintain secrecy, because Congress leaks like a sieve, particularly the Democrats, who will do anything to try and destroy this administration, even if it means harming our country. We've seen that. Congress can always hold oversight hearings, can hold as many as they want. They can subpoena people, get whatever information they demand. Democrats in Congress and their media have lied incessantly about these Venezuelan operations undertaken by our government. There are no war crimes by the Secretary of War or anybody else, period. The use of the word imminent, which some of the former federal prosecutors are hung up on, the actions, the concerns must be imminent, that is a lie. While it's helpful, it's not a requirement. The threat here, what's determinative here, is that it's ongoing. And it requires an ongoing military response as determined by one person, the President of the United States. I mean, so odd is this word imminent, and I get it. It's in the statutes and so forth and so on. But even within a war circumstance, there are certain battles that are imminent, certain actions that are imminent. So the point is, imminent in this case is not controlling. Furthermore, it's not in the Constitution. That's important. Some would take us back to the pre-9/11 times and treat military matters as criminal matters. I'm reading more and more of this. We're getting more and more lawyers who are opining on, seriously? Seriously, this is not a matter to be lawyered. They don't have to be mutually exclusive, that is, military actions and criminal actions. But they can be mutually exclusive. In other words, you can indict a foreign leader in absentia and then capture them and bring them back. We did that with Noriega, so we had military action. No declaration of war, by the way. We captured him. We had regime change. We brought him back. We prosecuted him. You can do that, but you don't have to do that. Venezuela and its access of other state actors and cartels, including Russia, China, Cuba, Iran, Hezbollah, and on, they receive and share military and economic support, intelligence, and so forth and so on. They are involved in drug trafficking with, for example, Hezbollah, the Mexican drug cartels, and they help Colombia push its cocaine into our country, which is a massive amount of cocaine, by the way. And China supplies chemicals for the fentanyl. 100,000 deaths a year, many more, actually, in my view. We have used exclusively law enforcement techniques up till now. Where the Coast Guard tries to catch the ships, it's like, chasing rabbits, tries to catch the ships, stops the ships, interrogates the individuals, arrests the individuals, brings them back to the United States, charges them, convicts them, case after case. It's not working. It's not working because they're using basically military operations and we're using what are effectively law enforcement operations. It's not work. We're talking about, again, the government of Venezuela that has, through its actions, committed acts of war against the United States. Just as if the government of Venezuela had released poisons in our air and killed hundreds of thousands of our people, or poisons in our water and killed hundreds of thousands of people. Would that be an act of war? And then we get this not so clever argument. Well, if it's an act of war, then we're committing or need to commit acts of war against them. Okay, fine. Well, then we need a declaration of war. No, we don't. I hope this helps to straighten out some things, but the bottom line is the media are lying, the Democrats are lying, they're trying to turn this into another scandal. The scandal is you have a president of the United States that's trying to save lives, you have a Secretary of War who's trying to save lives and doing a hell of a good job. You have our military that's trying to save lives, doing a fantastic job. They're doing what they need to do to protect the people of this country. It's not a law enforcement operation. It's not a rogue operation. There are no war crimes taking place. There are no violations of the Constitution taking place, period.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.